Hello, and welcome to a new milestone celebration. Given that it's been a while since the last special on the channel, today's video will cover some very extensive subject matter. We'll be ranking every Yakuza protagonist based on their writing over the years, which means that there will be spoilers present for every RGG game released up to now, so please proceed with caution. This goes without saying, but the final placements on the list are ultimately a matter of personal preference, rather than an objective assessment, so do share your own list of favorite protagonists in the comments. Oh, and one last thing before we begin. While the characters on this list are generally laid out in order of their introduction to the series, you'll notice by the timestamps that I've left Kiryu for the very end of the list. The reason for that is the sheer amount of arcs that he has undergone by now, so rather than covering 10 different storylines right off the bat, we'll instead save them for the finale of the video. With all of that in mind, the first actual placement of the tier list will be none other than the protagonist of Kenzan. Miyamoto Musashi, or Kiryu Kazumanosuke, is a very interesting protagonist in so many ways. His arc is arguably the most succinct that RGG has ever written, and while we just followed the very last years of Musashi's exceptional life, the events shown make it feel like you've seen his entire life's journey unfold before you. His story began with him as a commendable swordsman with a dojo of students learning from his craft. He is then challenged by another master swordsman whose skill led Musashi to question his own ability and drive, which snowballed into him partaking in some grand historic conspiracies, struggling with bloodlust as an endpoint of mastering swordsmanship, and he even ends up falling in love and seeing his loved one fade in his arms, leading to a quest for revenge. This is just a bit of the story that leads into the in medias res from the actual beginning of Kenzan as a game, yet it already elevates him above many other protagonists in RGG's catalog with regards to the severity of his personal arc. The way he conducts himself also draws heavy inspiration from the cockier side of Kiryu's character, most evident in the PlayStation 2 era of the series, as well as Like a Dragon Gaiden. Objectively, Musashi could easily be an S-tier placement, but personally, there is just a tiny bit missing from my experience with this game to fully push him into S-tier. I'm sure that once the long-awaited fan translation for Kenzan comes out, I'll be ranking every element of this game much higher than I do now, as my experience with it largely pertains to the critical path, and we know that Yakuza's side content offers this extra dimension to its leads that is often missing from the main story. All of that is to say that Musashi, for now, will remain at the very top of A tier, so that the individual tiers are more balanced by the end of the list. Anyway, yeah, please check out Kenzan. Next up, we have the first new protagonist after Kiryu in the main lines, Akiyama Shun. He was playable in Yakuza 4, Dead Souls, 5, and he also made brief appearances in Yakuza 6 and Infinite Wealth. His inclusion on the list will be the start of a trend that will become increasingly apparent with RGG's protags, something that you've likely noticed yourselves. In short, Akiyama's debut features a highly personal arc. Then, his subsequent appearances leave him as more of a supporting character, given the protagonist mantle with little personal growth. Though in the case of Akiyama specifically, his latest appearance, that being in Infinite Wealth, indicates that something really cool could happen for him moving forward, but we'll circle back to that. In Yakuza 4, we go through the events that led him to become everyone's favorite moneylender. The conspiracy tied to his expulsion from the bank he once worked for plays a crucial role in the power struggle of this game as well. He gets over the unfortunate end of an old relationship through interacting with Yasuko and Hana, gets to thank Kiryu for changing his life due to the Millennium Tower explosion, which snowballed Akiyama into a life of wealth, and he also finds a deeper meaning in his life beyond the financial stability he obtained. Akiyama's arc in Yakuza 4 is easily my favorite part of the game, and it's no surprise that so many fans of the series loved his stylish escapades. But then, there's the problem with his subsequent appearances to consider. I've said in the past how not every protagonist needs to undergo a massive character arc in every single game, but with many Yakuza characters, it feels like they're almost entirely static during their second lead appearances, with Akiyama's involvement being one of the most evident examples of that. I've spoken on his writing at length in my Yakuza 5 video essay, which will likely be mentioned plenty of times in this video, so to address this in the simplest way, there was no real reason to have Akiyama as a protagonist in 5, even though his antics were nonetheless entertaining. It extended the third part of the game substantially, played out like one of the many money-lending sub-stories from Yakuza 4, leading his involvement to be too iterative, and it just added more moving parts to a game that already struggled to connect the parts preceding it, all without laying the groundwork for more character development down the line, even though the potential for it was still there. In Yakuza 6, with the exception of a great reality check he gave to Kiryu, Akiyama's writing kinda followed the same path as in Yakuza 5, to the point where it felt like RGG didn't know what to do with him at this point, but felt like he was too amazing to be left out, which admittedly is true. That's why the more personal approach that was briefly exhibited in Infinite Wealth was so amazing to see, with Shun taking great issue with how Kiryu and Date handled the aftermath of Kazuma's quote-unquote passing. He had every right to blow up at these two, and we were also told that he was up to God knows what in the time between Yakuza 6 and now. So assuming we get a follow-up on that through a potential Akiyama Gaiden, I could see such a side narrative do wonders for him, bringing him a bit closer to the peak of his personal writing that was exhibited in Yakuza 4. With all of that said, despite the evident dips between his variety of appearances, I'd say Akiyama still evens out to a strong A tier, as even in his weaker involvements, he's still a blast to see in action. Alright, the next individual introduced in Yakuza 4 was Saejima Taiga, and as you may already know from my previous coverage of the character, I'm not really a fan of most of his screen time. To clarify, I think the arc he underwent in 4 was fantastic. The issue was most of the stuff that happened afterwards. In his debut appearance, he was given one of the darkest backstories that we'd seen in the main lines up to then. He was presented as someone who'd even make Majima's violent antics from Yakuza 1 feel bloody tame by comparison. The fact they managed to genuinely humanize him despite all that, through the speech at the Colosseum, the reunion with Sasai, the grieving of his sister's sacrifice, and by showing us glimpses into his and Majima's camaraderie, was deserving of so much praise. And while I may still hold Akiyama's arc as my favorite in that game, Tanimura's and especially Saejima's arcs were far better than most people give them credit for, especially in the context of the franchise at large. So, what's the issue then? It's that from Yakuza 5 onwards, we basically see a mulligan for the character, where his proverbial edges are sanded down, where his writing either boils down to just being Majima's kyodai, or Taiga himself being played for a fool, just so that the story of the game can give him an unnecessary do-over of his justified act of martyrdom, with the end result of Yakuza 5's instance of it having far less development for him as a character, all the while undoing select instances of his development from Yakuza 4. This tamer version of Saejima is then used as the blueprint for his brief appearances in Yakuza 6, 7, and even Infinite, with less and less individuality being present, which is why I've soured so much on the character over the years. The trope of a mean-looking guy who's actually gentle on the inside has been done so many times in the series in better and more unique ways before and after Saejima's retcon of sorts, which is why he was frequently in the lowest tier of my preference list in the series. Now, this may come as a surprise to you, but in comparison to that, the way Pirate Yakuza of all games handled Saejima's writing was honestly one of the biggest highlights of that game for me. The fact he plays into the role of the quote-unquote straight man from Japanese comedy setups, having him act as the voice of reason that points out the absurdity of Pirate's setup is perfect, and works brilliantly in tandem with the classic Kansai Ben charm that was most evident in moments like the flashbacks with Majima. He's not on his "everyone is my kyodai" shtick anymore. He's the one person that has Majima's best interests in mind throughout the story, and is the only person to call out Majima on still pretending like he has amnesia. The interactions between these two harken back to that camaraderie from Yakuza 4, the one that was overshadowed in Yakuza 5 due to the multi-city conspiracy theories and countless backstabs. Also, the drink links that they share and the allusions to connecting with other characters in that game were another great addition. To me, Pirate actually feels like a more natural continuation of that first version of Saejima's character than any of his other appearances do, which is something I'd like to cover in a separate video down the line. Because of this, I hope a potential Saejima Gaiden will draw more inspiration from these portrayals of him than the 5 era of his writing. But even with all of that said, the state of the character, when observed as a whole, leaves him in a strong C tier for the time. The last new protagonist from Yakuza 4 is Tanimura Masayoshi. In many ways, you could say that 4's story, and notably its resolution, were aimed to benefit his growth most of all, with how the main puppeteer of this game's events, and the very last boss, is given to Tanimura to defeat. This isn't to take away from the other commendable arcs of this game, mind you, it's just that the spotlight around Masayoshi and the nature of his personal growth is the most evident in 4's resolution. He started off as a young cop who used sketchy methods to ensure Little Asia's survival. He often gambled, paid little mind to his superiors, but even with the many elements of youthful indiscretion in his behavior, you could tell that he was a good person deep down. It was this type of character that was needed to counteract the evident levels of corruption from the force, and to be taken seriously due to his lawful affiliations. Cause even though Munakata's undoing was a team effort, Munakata's place could have easily been taken by someone else in the future unless we had a person inside the system trying to better it moving forward. Tanimura, with his personal growth and the nature of his monologues throughout the game, fulfills that role exceptionally. He also laid his father's memory to rest and became a bit more of a by-the-book cop than before, while still retaining his youthful cockiness. In the context of Yakuza 4, all of this makes for a quality arc, despite it being relatively simple in retrospect. Now, the issue with Tanimura arises from what happens after Yakuza 4 concludes, as despite Masayoshi apparently working alongside Date by the end of the game, he's basically completely forgotten after this. The events of Yakuza 6, concerning Little Asia going up in flames as part of that entry's power ploy, never address what happened to the residents of this mini-district, or what Tanimura specifically would have been up to in that time frame as one of its biggest defenders. It would have been one thing if he and the residents of the district faded during the fire, but when every game apart from Infinite Wealth basically pretends like he never existed, it damages the value of his character within Yakuza's continuously evolving world and storytelling. He's one of the biggest casualties of Yakuza 5 undoing 4's once decisive steps for future narratives, alongside the Saejima family and Kiryu stating he wouldn't run away from his responsibilities anymore. But that's something we've already addressed on the channel, so there's no need to repeat all of it here. As it stands right now, Tanimura gets a solid B tier, mostly due to other protagonists leaving a stronger impact from my perspective. But should he return in the future with an explanation for his absence up to now, this placement could easily change down the line. Alright, we now have whom I genuinely consider to be the single best protagonist in RGG's catalog by far, Ukyo Tatsuya from the Kurohyo series. The reasons for that are many, and will be extensively covered in a dedicated character analysis in the future. But for the time being, what's the deal with this character? So, imagine the most abrasive, self-sabotaging teen with anger issues and an affinity for crime. Have him believe that he has taken the life of a prominent Yakuza member, then throw him in an underground Colosseum tournament, and have multiple combatants join, some of whom are specifically there to pursue a personal grudge against him. Something that is honestly justified, considering the current view that these combatants have of him. Can you genuinely humanize someone like Tatsuya within the span of a single handheld game? The short answer is yes. Ukyo undergoes by far the most commendable and impactful character development out of any Yakuza protagonist, and that says a lot considering the ensemble we are usually dealing with. Every chapter has a prominent figure that leads Tatsuya to change bit by bit, either by making up for past errors in his own ways, or by saving other people through his growing combat abilities and the strive to better himself as a person. He doesn't flip the switch and become a stereotypical hero character, he undergoes gradual and believable development. By the end, he becomes a caring friend to those who truly know him, a dependable family member, a beam of hope for countless participants of the underground fighting exhibitions, yet he still retains that ballsy attitude from the beginning, except he only directs it, and the rage he has since learned to control, at those truly deserving of it now. Tatsuya even manages to avoid certain pitfalls that arise from the so-called second game problem, as even though his arc in Kurohyou 2 is far less personal than that of the first game, he doesn't just reset to zero like some of the other protagonists. He maintains his outlook on life from the ending of Kurohyou 1, undoes a massive government conspiracy that had the most evident effect on Kamurocho to date, and even though we have no clue what he's up to after the ending of the game, in terms of real-life employment, his absence is not the case of a necessity to fill out a crucial plot hole from a subsequent game, but a case of wanting to see more of a promising character. Admittedly, I do have a fair bit of bias towards the Kurohyou games, which is no surprise to any regular viewers of the channel, but genuinely, what Tatsuya did within the confines of these two entries is almost flawless. Right now, he would be in his early 30s, meaning there are so many stories that RGG could write for him and have them progress alongside the mainline entries, but whether or not that will ever happen remains to be seen. As for Tatsuya's placement for this video, he will firmly remain at the very top of S tier, likely for many years to come. Continuing off in a comparably positive light, we have my close second favorite, Majima Goro. Even before he was a playable character, he already made an impact. From being an entertaining wildcard in Yakuza 1, to being a surprisingly loyal example of what was otherwise chaos incarnate in Yakuza 2, to the far more human examples of his writing in Yakuza 3 and 4. It's interesting how Dead Souls of all games seamlessly continued off this evolutionary track by showcasing both the Mad Dog side and occasional glimpses at the man behind the Mad Dog moniker. While this game's efforts wouldn't be referenced later on with Majima, the writing present was absolutely consistent with his character up to then, and Yakuza 5, in a similar vein, continued further down the human path of the previous entries, showcasing a man who had to find his motivation to enjoy life again. This whole prelude is to say that the treatment in Yakuza 0 was not only justified, but necessary at that point in time. Even without that game, we could tell that Majima had an incredibly painful past, heavy burdens to carry, some of which were self-determined rather than outright forced on him, but despite all of the misery he lived through, he had an affinity to let loose deep down. In an effort to bring even more gravity to that side of his character, Zero shows us a person at the bottom eventually making the decision to try and heal. And the conviction with which this was expressed is why this game's treatment didn't feel like a story without reason to be directly shown. Most of this notion is generally accepted in the community, but here comes the kicker. I would argue that Pirate Yakuza's treatment of his character also contributed to further fleshing him out, even if it wasn't outright necessary. The motivation behind Majima's trip in that game, the innate protective instinct that persisted with him even during the absence of his key memories, the slow bleeding through of his more violent nature in moments like at the beach or during the Nelle peace talks, all of this is consistent with the character from the rest of the series. The thing that makes this entry stand out is showing glimpses into what a pre-Yakuza era Majima could be like. A more idealistic, even hedonistic individual in his displays that shows a gradual step back into the role he's chosen to carry in what the remainder of the series has shown us. Again, this is a matter that I would like to cover in a separate video, as the story behind Pirate has more to it than it's being credited for, even though the amounts of filler present puts a blemish on much of the symbolism and the hypotheticals present. That aside, if we looked at Zero's treatment of the character alone, coupled with the absence of noticeable step-downs in other entries of the series, that would already be enough to warrant Majima a strong S tier on this list. But when you add up all of his screen time from the franchise into a singular subject of analysis, Majima easily becomes one of the most compelling Yakuza characters by far. So yeah, we have another top 3 contender. Next up, we have a character whose inclusion becomes increasingly strange to look at with each subsequent callback to his apparent survival. Goda Ryuji, the Golden Dragon, and to many, the iconic Yakuza rival that made them adore the series all the more since Yakuza 2. As you may know from my previous coverage, like the final bosses tier list, I don't fall into the category of seeing Ryuji as the peak of Yakuza rival characters, though my appreciation of him has still grown with time. Without repeating myself too much, the unfortunate thing about Ryuji is that for all the nuggets of depth that he is given in specific moments of Yakuza 2, his growth and complexity is often undermined by the sheer spectacle of the game and its numerous villainous groups we have to gradually dismantle. Had I only judged him based off his screen time in that entry, there would be a far greater necessity for benefit of the doubt present than with the other characters. This is why I'm so glad that entries like Dead Souls and RGG Online elaborated on him as more than a dragon rival. Wanderings of the Golden Dragon showcase more of his personal conflict with Jin Goda. It tells us more of Ryuji's personal affinities, like his appreciation for Shinada. It's essentially that perfect brief prequel to the person that we would see in Yakuza 2, and it sets us up for his zombie spin-off appearance even better in retrospect. Now that I've brought it up, you'll notice how I barely mentioned Dead Souls up to this point, and that's because what that game does for a given protagonist differs quite a bit from case to case. For Akiyama, his writing is honestly business as usual, just in a zombie setting. He's still that stylish civilian you know and love, but that's about it. For Kiryu, we already know the lengths to which he'll go to protect what he loves, so the only thing that this game adds on to it is a direct show of respect from the rest of Kamurocho for his legendary stature and antics. By comparison, Majima's example of screen time was a clear continuation of what we saw in the PS3 era, just granted to us in a playable form this time round. Yet even in a game that features him as a protagonist, Ryuji somehow manages to stand out the most. He still maintains that Kansai charm, but is far more level-headed regarding his conflict with Kiryu. He doesn't hold on to past resentments, he admits to his own faults. We see more of his strong conviction in how he takes accountability for Nikaido's mayhem, and in how he makes the difficult choice of putting his mentor figure out of a painful existence. Plenty of these points were hinted at in Yakuza 2, but lacked just a tiny bit of elaboration to have more of the community see Ryuji for all of these positives. While I'd still rank him as a B tier overall, with regards to Yakuza protagonists specifically, Dead Souls did wonders for him from my perspective. So if there's anything to take away from this segment, it's to give that entry a shot, and not just for the turn off your brain type of fun that a zombie spin-off could conventionally grant. Alright, now we get to discussing the writing of Sawamura Haruka. She's probably the most unexpected protagonist for the series, particularly due to the playstyle given to her. But even as a fan of the rhythm-based escapades, her writing in Yakuza 5 is a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, we explore what her aspirations in life might be, how growing up with a single parental figure left her bereft of certain experiences during her formative years and adolescence, and we also see her form an even stronger connection to her family and closest associates due to her personal journey. On the other hand, the way we reached this journey was lined with prominent character retcons, technically dating back to Yakuza 3 but only furthering over time. Haruka's development was significantly abridged due to Yakuza 5's overarching power play, and the direction her character would take afterwards led to more missed opportunities and questions regarding what is or isn't consistent with her current characterization. Again, I've gone over this in more detail in the Yakuza 5 video, going over the switch up from the image of a street-smart kid to a more by-the-book innocent character. But even without taking this into consideration, Haruka sharing her part with Akiyama left her journey as a protagonist with far more to be desired, and ultimately falling short compared to many other arcs that we've explored thus far. It's unfortunate whenever I have to put a character into C tier, as it's not a matter of hating, or even casually disliking the arcs in question, but personally, this one as well simply doesn't resonate with me as much as RGG's other efforts. Maybe a future appearance of Haruka's can take more cues from that RGG Online trailer, to give us a story development we never knew we wanted. Okay, up next, we have one of the most prominent fan favorites, Shinada Tatsuo. For the record, I love this character quite a bit. On paper, he's a person with an incredibly compelling story arc that knows how to reel you in and leave you wanting more. It starts off really strong, his journey has an undeniably unique atmosphere to it, to the point where it almost feels like a spin-off, retroactively integrated into a mainline story. And the emotional peaks felt throughout the game absolutely elevate him above many other cast members. Now, you probably know where I'm going with all this build-up, but yet again, the Yume giveth and the Yume taketh away. Shinada is one of the most difficult characters to discuss, as if it hadn't been for the overarching plot of Yakuza 5 rearing its head near the end of his part, he would have had one of the best single-entry character arcs in the series. Frankly, most of the issues that I have with his writing are essentially the byproduct of having to involve Shinada in the finale in the first place. Like how he needs to step back from his deserved rage at the citizens of Nagoya for nearly erasing him, cause we need that emotional payoff of him going back to his quote-unquote home by the end. Or how he has to plunge himself further into debt by going to Akiyama to give back the money Shinada legitimately earned in helping Daigo himself, which Shinada then left completely to Takasugi, even overpaying his original debt to him. Yes, the initial gesture is sweet, but there's a line that needs to be drawn before a benevolent character is potentially turned into a doormat by the story. I realize this comes off as harsh, but if you've seen my analysis of his part in 5, you'll know that this is just a matter of a great character being dealt a poor hand. He has so many positives to him, like the unique perspective he has towards the shadier parts of the red light district, while still retaining a degree of innocence in his expression, or how his expertise in baseball doesn't come off as senseless bragging, but as something integral to an exchange, and the means of diffusing a heated moment in an outstandingly unique way. We have the breaking down of superficial human relationships that are maintained for convenience rather than genuinely expressed care. And we have Shinada reach a climax of his personal journey in a perfectly symbolic moment, with little to no regrets left about his career that could have been. But even with all of that, the downsides to his treatment and the consequence of their prevalence in the story's progression cannot be overlooked. As far as I'm concerned, Shinada just barely misses out on the A tier with his time in Yakuza 5, cause a character as genuine as he is evokes just as genuine and extreme emotions in response to his actions, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. I believe he deserved far better than what he was given by the end, but given that we covered this several months ago, we can finally move on to a completely different setting. The person at the helm of Ryuga Gotoku Ishin, known as both Saito Hajime and Sakamoto Ryoma, serves as an exceptional concept reaffirmation. We've evidently seen a take on a quote-unquote historical Kiryu in Kenzan already, but whereas Musashi was, still in many ways, more of his own character, Ryoma by comparison is a very clear extension of the Kiryu we see in the mainlines. Granted, this was a deliberate choice on the writer's part, as many cast members who'd reappear here would feature such parallels with their mainline counterparts, but this is most evident with Ryoma's story essentially being a redo of Yakuza 1 Kiryu's journey. We have a story of an estranged brother figure, the tragic passing of a father figure, a conspiracy that escalated an initial conflict to something beyond belief, an exceptionally high casualty rate throughout the campaign, and in the midst of it, a man with an unshakable conviction and a clear state of mind, bringing forth substantial change. Ryoma's transition from being a man away from home to a man with nothing but revenge on his mind is also slightly reminiscent of Musashi at first, but whereas the former's choices would allow his death to motivate others to be better, Ryoma would be a symbol of change that also got his own happy ending. He formed a genuine camaraderie with the Shinsengumi, saved his brother from the brinks of despair, and even found someone to spend the rest of his life with. Ultimately, I decided to rank Ryoma in the A tier for this particular list, by nature of his arc being less groundbreaking by series standards than that of the select protagonists that preceded him, but he is nonetheless a character whose writing execution leaves very little to genuinely criticize. Next up, we have the most unconventional entry on the list, down to the point where many viewers might even question why this person is on here at all. We're talking about an absolute legend of the manga world, and one of the most prolific protagonists of the 1980s, Kenshiro from Fist of the North Star. Now, why is he on this list? Well, just look at the title of the game. It's a perfect 50-50 split with Yakuza and one of Japan's most profitable IPs to date. But I digress. As much as I adore Lost Paradise for getting me into the associated source material, and despite Kenshiro being an absolute icon of the media that birthed him, as far as Yakuza character arcs go, he ranks pretty low. Don't get me wrong, the man is the purest form of an old-school hero archetype, but this also means little discernible growth can be shown within a game of this length for him, which also has to cover so many mini-arcs of the source material alongside him. The focus of the game is obviously on spectacle and fan service, which is a joy to watch, but stands in stark contrast to many of the other entries on this specific list. Kenshiro starts and ends the journey the same way, as an honorable fighter with a noble cause, and this is a journey that leads him to actually have a full-on happy ending in life, which is more than I could say for the manga, so props to RGG for achieving that. Also, having Kuroda Takaya voice him is genuinely perfect, cause Kenshiro is essentially what the mythos surrounding Kiryu would be like in the flesh, though doing away with the eccentricities that made Kiryu stand out from Yakuza 3 onwards. Given that he is an anomaly here, I'll give the man of Hokuto Shinken a strong C tier, but don't let that discourage you from trying out Lost Paradise. It's surprisingly fun, especially in New Game Plus. Alright, now we're getting to a special one, Takayuki Yagami from the Judgment series. If I were making this tier list based off the first game alone, our boy would be an easy top 3 or even top 2 placement. Unique story, outstanding personality, the way his long-lasting emotional baggage has been lifted in the first game was genuinely perfect. You all know this, and it's no surprise that most of the community ranks the original Judgment as one of, if not the single best RGG story to date. So where does the trouble kick in? Well, it's in Lost Judgment, but not for the reasons that you'd think. Yagami's stance on the subject matter of bullying and revenge makes perfect sense for his background. The issue is the way he expresses said stance in dialogue and how that is contrasted with his idealistic rival. The game does so much heavy lifting in elevating Kuwana's views and actions to the point where, apart from the members of the Genda Law Office, it feels like no one but Yagami stands by the notion that taking a life is still bad, even if you're trying to even the scales of justice and perceived morality. Even when Yagami should have the upper hand in a conversation, the writers either undermine his accomplishments from the previous game via false equivalency to bring him closer to Kuwana, or they have him repeat the infamous Sawa-sensei syntagma, despite there being countless other ways of communicating the tragedy of innocence that get caught in the crossfire. I still believe that there are many great points about Yagami in LJ, but this is nonetheless a noticeable step down in more ways than one. Yagami does win in the end. He seemingly broadens Kuwana's perspective on justice, but the phrasing of the game before this finale makes it feel like he only won in the end because he's the protagonist, and not because he compellingly proved his points and got people to stand by his perspective more confidently, in spite of a complex moral question making it harder to do so. Kuwana might very well be the story's greatest strength and biggest problem, because despite a flawless basis behind the character, the utility and how he affects the rest of LJ's world is still to the detriment of many other narrative elements of the game, most notably Yagami's characterization. Yet despite all of that, I still believe that this legendary detective genuinely deserves an S-tier placement. Maybe it's because, even in this imperfect state, LJ is still one of the most engaging experiences of the franchise, or maybe it's due to Judgment setting the bar so high that you can't genuinely undo its phenomenal basis with a minor step down. But ultimately, Yagami earned his spot in the upper echelons of the series in more ways than this limited section of the video could describe. Should we get a Judgment 3 in the future, I'm sure that there's plenty of narrative seeds that could be explored there to bring him back to his highest highs from the first game. So, RGG, if you're listening, please consider giving these boys one more spectacle. Next up we have Kasuga Ichiban. Just like with the previous entry, we have a very particular issue to consider. We have a nigh-flawless first game, where much of its exceptional value is thanks to the writing of the lead character. we have the fulfillment of a highly personal and incredibly moving character arc, and then we have a game that does little to push the envelope in the same way after it. Ichiban in the first game is amazing. He may be a sweet, kind-hearted individual, but should you strike a nerve or attack one of his closest friends and family, the only way that you're getting out unscathed is if you're Kiryu or one of the Jimas. Ichi being so filterless about his emotions is part of his appeal, but the way this was used in Infinite in particular makes it feel like he's being written for a fool just so that a story that doesn't really do much for him has the grounds to take him from point A to B. Now, this does yield some gems, as all of his interactions with Kiryu and the mentorship on display make for some of the most noteworthy highlights of the series for me. But on the flip side, even something that I was genuinely excited for, like the exploring of his and Saiko's relationship, has some baffling writing choices despite good intentions for adequate tension building. But yeah, going back to the original point, the first game gave us a really promising start, the second game dropped the ball by a bit for Ichi specifically, so all in all, I'll leave the Dragonfish in a strong A tier for the time. Considering how transformative Kiryu's third title was for his long-term growth, I'm expecting something equally compelling to happen for Ichiban, and assuming the estimates of its release date are correct, then Lad 9's 2028 release can't come soon enough. For the second to last entry on the list, we have one of the best supporting characters in RGG's catalog, Kaito Masaharu. His so far only protagonist role was in the beautifully constructed Kaito Files. This DLC offered us an elaboration on why this incredibly loyal and endearing character had such a strong effect on individuals like Yagami and Higashi, and this was done in a pretty unexpected way. Front to back, this is a classic J-drama setup with an actual happy ending for the will they won't they couple at the center of the events. Kaito's dynamic with both Mikiko and Jun is awesome. The fights against Kyoya and Shirakaba were both cool and really distinct, and the lengths to which Masaharu went to help Mikiko in the past and present made me wish we got to see even more of their dynamic, cause they come across like genuine equals and fully formed individuals. Now, while the campaign is solidly written throughout, I wouldn't quite put it into the A or S tier just yet, as there's something about the other protagonists inhabiting those tiers that resonated with me on a deeper level, but that shouldn't take away from how much Kaito achieved in the midst of a campaign this short, alongside select bursts of brilliance in Judgment and LJ. Provided we see more of him in the future, I could easily see him as an A-tier mainstay. But yeah, the fact we had so many cool characters to go through reminds me that we're really lucky to have a franchise this ambitious that has stuck around for almost 20 years. So as a fitting end to this tier list, let's take a look at the man who started it all. Kiryu Kazuma needs no introduction. The man has experienced everything you could imagine, and his individual story arcs over the decades have covered a myriad of highs and lows, emotionally speaking, as well as writing-wise, so we'll go through them now in chronological order. Yakuza 0 is the perfect example of Kiryu's brash beginnings, his foolish idealism towards the Yakuza life, and it succinctly exhibits his youthful ambition, both as a human being and as the makings of a quote-unquote true Yakuza. His dynamic with Nishiki, Kiryu's struggles with the way he might build his potential would-be legacy, and the reinforcement of sticking by your own path in life are the biggest highlights of his development in the 80s, as far as general writing goes. Yakuza 1, being our actual first exposure to the character in release order, is just as compelling of a first look at him. We see a man almost lose himself in despair, saying goodbye to one friend or family member after another, yet still find the strength to keep going in spite of it all. We see various sides to Kiryu, from the classic stoic behavior to a more humorous side, intentionally or otherwise, to a very hopeful, caring demeanor to lend further value to the moments where he shows his fragility. For a PS2 era narrative that's not as cutscene driven as something like MGS, this is honestly one of the best character portrayals that comes to mind for that generation. So the fact we didn't deviate too far from the spaces moving forward just tells you RGG understood Kiryu from the very beginning. Also, Nishiki was the perfect boss to conclude this chapter of Kiryu's life and development, even more so thanks to the extra content of Yakuza 0, and the added Kiwami scenes. By comparison, Yakuza 2 was honestly a step down in many ways, as there is little discernible growth shown compared to most of the other games. While there may be some great moments present, like the scene where Kiryu wakes up from a nightmarish recollection of the first game's events, or his emotional breakthroughs tied to Sayama and their evolving relationship, few of these scenes act as narrative seeds to allow for substantial growth moving forward. Between Sayama being unceremoniously written off in Yakuza 3 and other games showcasing losses and introspective moments of far more consequence for Kiryu as a person, this leaves his overall antics from 2 lose much of their initial impact, unless we're talking about building a sense of spectacle for the player, which is perfectly exemplified with Ryuji being the final boss of the story. Again, it's not that every game needs to make a definitive step forward for the protagonist, but in the case of Yakuza, there are far more cases that commit to this writing decision than not, and Yakuza 3 is one of the best examples of that. It builds off Kiryu's general benevolent nature brilliantly, and shows us who the person behind the legendary Yakuza moniker really is. Even if you hate this game, the emotional payoff from it is undeniable, and even without said payoff, this game's interpretation of Kiryu feels like a more natural evolution on his origins than Yakuza 2. The addition of Joji allowed Kiryu to resolve some long-time emotional baggage and shows his growth when paralleled to the image of Kazama he held dear, at least symbolically speaking. Plus, concluding the story with a dark mirror to Kiryu through Yoshitaka Mine was a phenomenal choice too, showing us what a person without the support of individuals like Kazama, Nishiki, or Yumi to bring out one's human side could end up becoming. Then we have Yakuza 4, which is a strange case comparable to Yakuza 2 in a sense, cause what little this game tries to do for Kiryu, and him owning up to past transgressions, is quickly undone by the next entry. Though, unlike 2, Yakuza 4 had far bigger risks to tackle during its runtime. Being the first game to tackle multiple protagonists, it had to balance 4 individual story arcs and ideally resolve them in comparably compelling ways. But between the 4 protagonists, Kiryu's part largely comes off as a last-second addition that didn't do enough to offer him a final bow as the series lead. As for the semi-canon companion piece to 4, Dead Souls also just reaffirms the character we knew up to now, but with the bonus of having non-Yakuza individuals finally acknowledge Kiryu's stature in a deserving manner. This is just a spin-off, however, so the lack of a crucial character arc can ultimately be excused here. Moving on to Yakuza 5, once again, you know where to look for more details on his character evolution. But to keep it simple, Kiryu's section of the story is easily the strongest of the entire game. While the reasoning for his departure from the orphanage is clumsy, to put it lightly, this story deepened our perspective on the character so well that ending his life in Yakuza 5 might as well have been the perfect bittersweet send-off for him. The exchanges with Haruka by the end, him accepting his Yakuza side, which he tried to deny for so long, showing how worn down he's been by the events of the preceding games, all of these writing choices were fantastic additions to the person that we've known leading up to this. Now, following off of Yakuza 5, we get to the trilogy of games that divided the community the most, consisting of Yakuza 6, Gaiden, and Infinite Wealth. Personally, I find that of these 3, Gaiden gave us the strongest send-off to the character, and Infinite Wealth gave us the weakest. But I don't think the existence of one entry invalidates the finality of the other, contrary to popular belief. Starting with Yakuza 6, it builds off the more exemplified martyrdom from Yakuza 5 perfectly. It shows us the lengths to which Kiryu will go to ensure a brighter future for his loved ones, even if he has to fully destroy his legacy and irreversibly get himself out of the equation to achieve that. Gaiden shows us the consequences of that decision, but without the baggage of involving more characters than is necessary. Unlike Yakuza 4 and 5, Kiryu is truly the focal point here. He is given a last hurrah with his dojo mates while he is still at full strength. He has a number of moments where his youthful indulgence is at full display, just like in the good old days, and the high note this ends on allows for Infinite Wealth to take the form of an epilogue befitting a man with this long of a legacy. As far as Kiryu's part specifically goes, it's the most elaborate curtain call for a star player, both in terms of tying up any remaining loose ends and celebrating his life's work in a way that highlights the ugly and beautiful sides to it with equal fervor. The path that led us to the end may have been messy. It had numerous ups, downs, retcons, and consequences, but the impact of this character on both the series and its fans will never be forgotten. In my opinion, when all is said and done, he absolutely deserves an S-tier placement. I realize this list got a bit rambly by the end, but hey, 20 years for a franchise is a pretty big deal, so I wanted to cover as many bits of info as I could. Hopefully that didn't derail this video too much. As it stands, these are my final placements, and given that this was a matter of personal preference, as I've stated before, feel free to express why you love a given protagonist more than the others. Is it their development, the amusement of their antics, or do they simply click with you in ways you can't explain? Whatever the case, the comment section is yours for expression. Thank you once again for all the support over the years, and I hope you enjoyed this milestone celebration as much as I have. Hopefully, we'll get to celebrate many more of them down the line, in a comparably positive way. So, until next time, take care of yourselves, and have a fantastic day. Cheers!